Hi guys, welcome to another episode. Today I'm going to be talking to you about how I've made this weave into this top. I'll also then talk about how I've cut the circles and constructed this. I'll then at the end talk about the things to watch out for when you're creating these patterns and what can happen if you get it wrong. So let's jump into the video and I'll show you how we've constructed this first, and then we'll jump into how we've got this weave on the top of this. So let's pull in the videos just here and let's get on with it. So this video started as a scrapwood build-off challenge. So as you can see from me planing down old parts, some of them were from old mahogany doors, other parts were from kitchen cabinets and that sort of thing. So you can see that I had to plane and thickness everything to what I needed. I also then needed to cut everything down into all the small components that I then glued together to create the patterns. The parts of the oak kitchen cabinets were then glued together into strips that then formed the basis of all the boards that I needed to cut up. Once this was done, I then moved on to cutting the circles that I needed for the 3 layers. So here you can see that I've got all my parts together. I'm trying to cut my circles. I know I've skipped the glue ups. We're not really interested in glue ups, are we? But this is how I've then essentially cut the circles. This was the middle section, which was parts of oak and mahogany, that I then chamfered the edges once I'd cut them. These were then routed with a groove. I also then did an oak section for the base and routed another groove in. These were to house the bearings that would be the runners to allow it to rotate. So now we're jumping into how I've cut the weave. It's actually a lot more straightforward once you've got the hang of it than you might think. Essentially, I created the pattern that I wanted to cut up and then glued it to the section of the normal oak that I wanted to mix in with it. Now, by then creating 2 layers, you are then be able to cut through to make corresponding parts. So the trick with this is, once you've got those parts stuck together, is to then run them through the bandsaw. So once you've run them through your bandsaw, you've essentially got to compensate for the kerf that the blade will take away. So on the glue ups that you'll see, you then have to create essentially shims, or you could use veneers if you've got them, to fill in that gap that you've taken away with the blade. If you don't fill in those gaps, you then have parts that don't correspond to each other, so you would end up with gaps, or you would have to aggressively sand them to get them to fit together. So the simplest way is to use these glued in shims. So as you can see, I'm gluing it all together here, which is it's relatively simple. You end up with 2 halves of corresponding parts. You then do the same process once these glues have dried, of layering up the small part again back over the top of the other part. So then you again run it through the bandsaw, cut it again, and away you go. You keep mixing those parts together and keep merging them into the patterns that I ended up with. So then we're on to just taking this sanding. I had ran this through the drum sander to flatten it all off. I then finished it with a 180 finish and then glued it all up together to the corresponding parts. Now this is then finished. For me, it was going to be food safe, so it was to finish with the Rubio Monocoat Pure, and then assembled all the parts together. I then finished the top with Rubio, and here you go. It pops that colours out and looks really great. I'm really chuffed with the finish. Now, the takeaways from this is that there is repercussions to me using scraps. So I'm happy with the finish, but a year on, and the mistake I made was using plywood. Now, all the other finishes sit flush and lovely and nice, even having the grain orientated round the other way. So that works because there's so small pieces, the movement's really small. So the problem is you get with the ply is because you layered, you've got grain going both directions. The movement's different. So the repercussions of that is an advice for anyone who decides to do this. Do not, even if you think pattern ply is lovely, do not mix it with other woods. The repercussions of that is you get movement with the ply, actually more than you do with the wood, and you can end up with a bumpy surface. Now for me, this is home use, I'm happy with it. But for me to be happy with it to sell it to someone else, I wouldn't be. So for me, I would never use pattern ply or a ply format into a wood weave like this. And ideally, if you're worried about movements depending on what timbers you'd use, I would ensure that you would pattern everything with all the grain direction in the same corresponding direction. So other than that, I say for me, it worked out really well. No gaps, it's very smooth, it's all food safe, it's had cakes on it, it's had salt and pepper, everything you can imagine around that glorious dining table and enjoying a good meal. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.